Mr. Wilson?
Here.
Mrs. Judy?
Here.
Mrs. Brazel?
Here.
Mr. Green's absent this evening. Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mrs. Evaldi?
Here.
Mr. Beavers?
Here.
Number 3, tax levy review, turn it over to Jan.
Okay. Should we write it all?
I'll stand over here. Okay, so this went out in your board packet, so you've probably all seen this brief PowerPoint before. But I just kind of want to go through this quickly, and then we can talk about a little bit more detail. So key points, and if you were here last year, you've seen basically the same kind of thing last year with PowerPoint that you did. So Murphysboro School District being part of Jackson County, tax capped. So we fall under what they call the PTEL law. And any increases that we receive are limited to the lesser of 5% or the consumer price index of the previous year. So the CPI, the consumer price index last year for 2022 was 6.5%. The year before that it was 7%. So us being limited at 5%, already, you know, any property tax increases aren't keeping up with inflation, the cost of inflation. We also can levy for any new property that hasn't been on the books before, new businesses, new houses. So the PTEL law doesn't actually cap individual property tax bills or individual property tax assessments. It's the district's levy that the cap is on, not individuals. So 2022 last year was the first time since the tax cap law, the PTEL was enacted in 1990, was the first time that that 5% ceiling had been reached. And I think it's in the PowerPoint, but I know it was less than that, and 1990 hasn't been close to that many years. So our components of the tax levy. So what we know when I put together the levy, which is, you know, what money we need from the taxpayers to operate because we're so heavily dependent as a school district on property taxes. We do get money from the state, evidence-based funding from the state, but included in that formula is our local efforts. So what do we get from taxpayers from property taxes? What do we get from taxpayers from corporate county property tax? So, you know, we have to look at that, the whole big picture. So what we know, last year what our extension was, and the extension is what we actually received. That doesn't include our debt service, so any bonds that we might have out there. And in 2022, we did not have any bonds that we didn't abate, so there were no debt service payments made by our taxpayers last year and the past couple of years, I guess. We know the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. We get that from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. But what we don't know, we don't know what our EAV, our equalized assessed valuation, is going to be in our district. We have no idea. I get an estimate from the assessor. I get an estimate of what the new property is going to be, but that new property is broken down by township. So it tells me what Somerset, it tells me what Murphysboro Township, but it doesn't tell me what part of that new property is actually in Murphysboro School District, because some of it's in Carbondale. We found out years ago, the new Egyptian Electric building, that wasn't in our taxing district, that was Alvarado, so we didn't get to take advantage of that. So these are things we don't know, and this is why we levy higher than we need to, because we don't know what the value of property for all of our district is going to be. So I already mentioned this a little bit. CPI, Consumer Price Index, is the primary driver of these increases with our tax extension. 6.5% for this year, 7% for last year. Our 10-year average was only 2.5%. 5-year average 4.2%. So you can see that we are, these numbers are a lot higher in the inflation. You know, we've all lived it. We've all bought groceries and, you know, eaten out. So we know, we've seen what the CPI really is and what inflation means for us. This is kind of a chart of where we started in the beginning. I can't see that number, but it's 5. There's one all the way to the left.
6.1.
Okay. Yeah. So that's when we first started, before tax caps. These are the increases, comparison year to year. And you see all these lower numbers and where we are last year and where we are this year.
Can you go back to that? Are those numbers that 2.3, 2.4, do those account for the abatement that we do?
I don't believe this actually includes our debt service at all. So this is
Okay.
just because the way debt service works, if we have bonds out there, the county clerk automatically gets that information. When the board approves a bond and, signs off on everything, they get that information, they have our debt schedule. So that's what we do here really, I don't wanna say it doesn't matter, because it does, but as far as the bonds go, that's already predetermined by our debt service schedule. Now, if you remember, we had several projects that we paid for with our county facility sales tax, the 1% county sales tax we're getting. And as a district, because we have the highest enrollment of all the individual schools in Jackson County, we get the biggest cut of that county facility sales tax. So we've sold some bonds to do work at the middle school, the high school athletic fields, and then we have an old bond from when we built the General John A. Logan and then refinanced that. That's when we talked about abatement, that it was on the books for taxpayers to pay for, and then the board abated that. So they said, okay, we're not gonna ask you to pay for that as taxpayers, we're going to use that county facility sales tax for that bond. And then all the bonds that have been sold over the last 17, 19, 20, those were also county facility sales tax bonds, so that does not touch your tax rate. Now, we did sell bonds before June, it was before June. Received the money in August, working cash bonds to go towards the cost of the high school gymnasium that's going to be built. And so that will go on for the first year this year and will be on the tax rolls, so we can move it. Got a little tangent there, but. Okay, so we talked about the balloon levy to ask. So we're asking for a 17.45 increase in taxes, which I'm assuming a lot of you saw that in the paper or maybe on Facebook, you saw that, and that's maybe why you're here. And including in that is $659,650, which is the debt service I just talked about. The working cash bonds, that's the amount that we'll have to pay for next year on the high school gymnasium that we're going to build. So that's part of that. But this balloon, we're asking for that, that's not what we're gonna receive. What we expect to receive, and this is still a guess, because I don't know what our equalized assessed valuation will be yet. Won't know that probably until June. That's usually about when we get that information. So what we expect to receive is 12.85% increase, which 5% is that max on property tax, the PTEL, the tax caps. 7.7% is for the working cash bonds, and then 0.15% is what we might estimate will be new property to the district, what we'll get from the new property that's generated. And so this is the estimated balloon. So what the board saw last month when we did our estimated amount that needed to be levied, they saw the 9.7 million. Then the 659, as we talked about, that's the debt service for the high school gymnasium payments next year. So we're gonna ask for 10.3 million. What I estimate we're actually going to get, a little over 9 million without the bonds and interest to debt service. So a total of 9.6 is what I'm estimating. Okay, and this is kind of where we are. This is like changing from year to year in the extension. So what we actually receive. So you start with 2010, what the increases in tax rates without those bonds, that debt service. So you can kind of see across. The highest increase from year to year was 2022, and it's 5.3. That's the year we had a 7%, basically inflationary number with the consumer price index. So the actual increase on the levy compared to 2022 would be 13.28%, not including debt service. We expect it to be 5.15% is what we're estimating. Like I said, that's a guess. I have my crystal ball out today looking over things again. It's kind of hard to know those things at this point ahead of time. And this is kind of just a history of the taxes that, again, not including debt service. Well, it does because it's down there at the very bottom. So we had 1 year where we did not abate, $481,000. and then you move up to 2023 where we have the 659. So the levy history, basically what we levied, actual taxes every year. The next to the last column is what we're asking for, with the last column being the projection. So I say new for the tax levy. Some of these things were new last year, but we're still talking about it because it is still a new thing, something we've not been accustomed to. So there's an adjustment that's been happening with aggregate funds, and that's a Public Act 102-0519. So bottom line, we actually got a little bit of additional money, 2021, 2022. There's no way to know the amount of that we're going to get, recapture they call it, for the 2023 levy. I don't levy for that. That's just something that the county clerk and the county treasurer, they come up with those amounts after they've looked at, errors, court order, the certificates of error, and that's where that money comes from. So that's kind of a new thing from last year. This is another new thing that we're required to talk about with our tax levy and put out there what our fund balances are as of June 30th. So by fund, the education fund is where we do most of our business. So we had almost $8 million in the education fund at the end of the year. Across all funds, we had 16.5. Some of that money, capital projects fund, that is money that comes in on the county facility sales tax. So that's, put in a separate fund only to pay for debt service for projects we've already approved and for small projects that the board might approve and decide to pay for out of that fund.
These funds include the ESSER money too, right?
Yes. So all the federal money, and you've been hearing the talk about the federal ESSER money. And we got our first amount of money at the very beginning of COVID, so FY20. So by the time we're done with this, we have 5 years of grants that we're dealing with the ESSER money. So it's a lot of additional money pumped into our budget, but the fund balances are so high in the education fund because we've been spending some of that money on textbooks and things that we normally would have had to spend money on, but we've been using the grant funds to do that. So we've built our fund balances up. We have that. I don't want to say that's a rainy day fund, but this is my 22nd or 23rd tax levy that I've done since 2002. We've never had fund balances like this. When I walked in, we were borrowing money to make payroll. So, but we will be looking, these fund balances, since we have to start paying for things out of our own pocket, property taxes, the evidence-based funding that we've been paying for with ESSER dollars, the money's gonna go a lot faster now that we've had an opportunity to not, spend our fund balances and to make, have some reserves. So, but I'm telling you, it's gonna go fast because we're paying, I think, 15 people out of the ESSER grant. 15, that's certified staff members plus some non-certified staff members. So, final thoughts. So the tax cap is doing what it's intended to do. We aren't getting more than 5%. Even though the inflation is much higher than that, 5% is still a lot. It's still a lot of new money. But the things that we need that new money for, we don't know about evidence-based funding. We don't know, once the grant money is gone, if the state will be able to pay us what they've been paying us in our evidence-based funding, which is our old general state aid. And now it is, the state is trying to get all districts to a point of adequacy so that we all have the same resources. Well, that's never gonna happen. We know down here, we're never gonna have the same resources that they have in suburban Chicago, but it gives us a leg up and gives us a little bit of money. All these funds with the effects of inflation, the increase in minimum wage, which January 1st, it goes to $14 an hour. January 1st of 25, $15 an hour. But in most cases, we're already paying more than that, just to get people to come to work. Because there's such a labor shortage, we've had to adjust some of our salary schedules. We had a 9% increase in health insurance this year. Big increases in our transportation contract, driven by labor costs, big increases in food. You see increases everywhere. Property and liability, even copy paper, even though we're buying it by a truckload or by a pallet instead of a whole truckload. But things just cost a lot more than they did, as you know, you're at your level with your household, you're seeing it too. Another one? Okay. So just a couple more things, in case I didn't hit it. As I said, the preliminary levy was presented at the November 21st board meeting. I only had one comment or question since that time when we put that preliminary on display, and that was actually from a board member. So I haven't had any community questions at this point. We're having this hearing because we did levy for 2023 more than 5% of the taxes that we received last year. So what our ask is more than 5% more. We did publish this in Southern Illinois on December 5th. This was posted on our website on December 13th. So some of the information, and I didn't say this earlier, when I was trying to get my estimates from the assessor's office, I pull a bunch of reports from them to try to figure out what our actual property tax assessment's gonna be. And even with those reports, it's still a guess. So, we do the best we can, but we know what we're asking for in that balloon is gonna get knocked back every year. And we're not gonna get 17%. We're not gonna get that. We're gonna get the bond payments, and we're gonna get 5%, and we're gonna get any new property. So that's kind of where we are.
Okay,
Okay.
any questions from the board? Moving on to item 4, we'll have the recognition of the audience. This is pertaining to the tax levy information that was just told. Is there anybody from the audience that would like to be recognized?
Come on, I said all bad.
Sure, I have a question.
Okay.
So if you know that you're capped at 5%, why are you asking for 17? I mean, I get why, but, I mean,
Because if we don't ask for more than that, we won't get all that we're entitled to. And part of the, I talked about evidence-based funding, part of that calculation with our local effort, if we say, we don't want that, we don't want a 5% increase, and they can look at us, well, if you didn't need it for your local effort, then, that's gonna be factored into the equation for what we get from the state. So if we don't levy at our maximum, we could also have the double hit of getting less in our state money to support all of our programs. Does that make sense?
Yes, before I do the motion to adjourn, I have clarification. So the bonds for the auditorium, is that something like the previous football and all that, that will be portion abated for for county facility sales tax?
Yes, and the board has to, even though that's paid for with county facility sales tax, we still have to do an abatement resolution.
It's just like a collateral, for lack of a
Right.
better term, because property tax or
Right.
sales tax can
And
fluctuate.
the reason they do that they still have us go ahead and do the assessing, do the, include that, and then go back and do the abatement is if for some reason the county facility sales tax revenues dry up or start, we're
Or
not.
you're shut down because of COVID.
Yes.
Sales tax
Yeah.
drops, you gotta have some collateral to pay the
So,
bills.
right, estimated collections of 1.8 million in county facility sales tax. So if we were to not get those funds, say we only got $1 million, that gives us the ability, and hopefully we'll never have to do this, the ability to get that money from other sources, which could be property taxes. But the trend that we're seeing right now with our county facility sales tax, there's always, I look at it monthly when we get the receipts from the regional office, ROE, to see where we are compared to where I budgeted, where we were last year, just to make sure that we're going to come very close to hitting that 1.8, and things look good. We've said this before, since the dispensaries came to Jackson County, that's really, even with COVID, like maybe, I think it was the end of June of 20 when Illinois made it legal to open the dispensaries. It's really impacted positively our county facility sales tax. So that's been a really good thing, but that's why we have to do that abatement,
You gotta
just
have
in
your
case that
collateral.
doesn't come in.
But that gym, we're
That's-
gonna abate and flip it to county.
Yeah, so we'll be asking the board at the January meeting to abate the 2017 bond, the 19 bond, and the 2020 bond, so that there are no payments made with property tax funds with those bonds.
Okay,
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Kevin?
Yes, yes.
With the continuing economic situation of the country, CPI is going to continue to potentially rise, right?
Yes.
How do we look year over year? How do we look ahead in what is kind of a new, you see the 30-year trend that you showed since the tax cap has been in place. The CPI hasn't been where it's been for the last 2
Right.
years ever before, since 1990.
Yeah.
But assuming that that's going to continue to be the norm for 5 years, is this what we're looking at every single year potentially? Or,
It could be.
I'm not asking you to prognosticate
Yeah.
it like, you know.
Yeah, and it very well could be. We are, we track like for 2023, we'll know very shortly what next year's gonna look like, what the CPI will be for the 2024 levy. We're gonna know that. I think it's gonna be less, but until December finishes out, we won't know what that's gonna look like. But, I mean, so that's where it comes in, especially important now that the ESSER money, we have to spend that all by the end of September. We've spent, I did an expenditure report the other day, and we've spent about a third of what the balance that's remaining. I had to rewrite the grant at the beginning of this fiscal year, so we've already spent a third of the money. So we're, on track to spend that. Once that's gone, then that's where a 5-year projection for us that the board will, need to spend some time with. And what's it gonna look like for us? What's our state funding gonna look like? What's our federal, what's our property tax? And what do we need? Because we still have, after this year, 24, we still have 1 more year of our bargaining contract with our teachers union. And we have 2 more years after this with our Teamsters. We did 3. 2 more years after this year with our Teamsters.
I thought we did 3.
3.
Yeah, but the 3 started this year, so we'll have 2 more.
2.5, yeah.
So yeah, those bargaining agreements, that'll be important as we look to do that. So that's something that after the first of the year, I plan on starting. So the board, has up-to-date information as we go through and can make those decisions moving forward.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
nothing else, entertain a motion to adjourn the tax levy hearing.
So,
Second.
I apologize, that's my longest one
Second.
ever.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.